Hey, everybody. Today, you're going to learn what the 3 degrees of freedom are and how to get them. My guest today is Derek Clifford. Derek, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jonathan, it is so great to be on the show and to actually get to speak with you in person for the first time today.
Absolutely. So, um, give us the 30-second summary of who you are and what you do, and then we'll dig into your backstory as we go.
Sure. So I am a real estate investor, entrepreneur. I recently enabled the 3 degrees of freedom, which is time, location, and financial freedom for myself. And I did that by investing in real estate on the side while working a W-2 job, and left my W-2 position as a project manager back in 2021, in September 2021. And then started investing in syndications along the way. Did some joint ventures and bought some single family homes and small multifamily apartments. That's kind of done the 1031 game and gotten myself up to a point where we have about 400 units under management, where I do all the capital raising, the asset management, and the underwriting. So me and my small team, we're really focused on systems, which is the time freedom component of what we do, and using virtual assistants and team members, and basically leveraging everyone in the right amount at the right time in the right capacity to be able to produce incredible results for us and our investors. And at the same time, I want to try to keep to the 30 seconds, but at the same time, since we're locationally independent, we have the ability to basically travel anywhere. And my wife and I both can work virtually, with people that we trust as boots on the ground for both sides of our business, in our specific industries. So
And
that's
so
a
I just, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you there. I thought you were wrapping up. I was just going to say, and that's, as you were just explaining to me, this has allowed you to go spend 3 months in Japan, where you just came back from. So,
Yep.
uh, before we get into how you did this, uh, I'd love to know how it was that you managed this from Japan. So just
Yeah.
I know you were partly on vacation. You were chasing the cherry blossoms, which sounds like just a great trip. But you obviously, you had to keep track of your business while you were away. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, the great thing is that if you build systems and processes, especially so that you have things that aren't urgent ever, then you have the ability to work within time zones anywhere around the world. Because when I wake up in the morning, the day it's already evening in the United States, or vice versa, right? Like, depending on where you are in the US versus in Asia, like that specific time zone difference is really hard. In Europe, it's a little bit easier because, and I don't need to get into this too much, but basically, what I've done is I've allowed myself to be able to look at dashboards and have an automated workflow using Zapier, using Slack, using Asana, so that when things come in via email, they're automatically forwarded over to my assistant, and they have a standard operating procedure that they look at when there's a situation or an issue that comes up, or if it's just a financial reporting document, right, that comes in from a property manager. And once that goes in, it goes into a spreadsheet that I created and programmed myself, that basically shows a dashboard of all of our properties. So whenever the financial data comes in, my day, it doesn't matter if I see the reports an hour after they come out or 24 hours after they come out. It's really not that urgent unless it's an urgent thing. And if it is, there are protocols where people can, message me via Slack, or they can call me, or they can, send me an email, and I'll be on it because I have those. But for the most part, it seems like it's really complicated, but I've put myself into a position where I don't have to be there for every beck and call. I have a Calendly set up, so if people want to speak to me, there's always a link out there, and then they can just schedule a time for me to be able to sit down and talk that works for my schedule, regardless of whatever time zone I'm in, right? So I don't do phone calls, I don't do emails, and I set up everything. And for instance, if I do like investor outreach, then I'll record a Loom video and I will delay send it and have it go out when it's the appropriate time in their time zone. So I'm just super hyper, like, focused on systems and batching things. So if I do like an investor communication reach out, like a one-to-one, I'll sit down and I'll batch like 5 or 6 Loom calls and just say, "Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing? This is Derek. I'm just checking in with you." And I would record that. And then 30 seconds later, I'd say, "Hey, Mike, how are you? This is Derek. I wanted to check in and see how your daughters are doing," or whatever. And then I'd have 5 of those videos, right? And then I take just a second to queue up a text message, drop the link in there to the text message and say, "Hey, I recorded this video, thought of you," 5 times, and I delay send them so that it's an appropriate time in their time zone. So I guess it's kind of a little bit of a mind shift, or like a focus shift, but I've gotten away from going to like desk hours, right? Like I break my day up into focus time, office hour time, and self-care time. And depending on where I'm at in what time zone, then the outside world will have to conform with what my rules are based on my schedule. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully it gets close to
Well,
what.
yeah, it's kind of gets us on the way to it. I mean, I find this really interesting. Um, and I was wondering if you could give me some more examples of kind of the systems that you have in place. Like,
Mhm.
for example, um, I mean, just like tell me a little bit more about what stuff is happening at your properties somewhere, you're on the other side of the world.
Yep.
Like, kind of walk me through a flow of what takes place.
Okay, well, how about I walk you through an example? Like we had a fire at one of our properties in late
Perfect.
December,
Perfect.
right?
Yeah.
We didn't happen to be traveling, but it might as well have been because I was out and about. I was doing something else. Excuse me, I had to cough there. I apologize. So what we ended up doing was when the alert came in, I had a boots on the ground partner for all of my properties. So every market that we're in, there's a boots on the ground partner that's there. And one of their key responsibilities when we end up forming the general partnership and lining out the roles and responsibilities and divvying out equity ownership for each, person for what each person does as a general partner, one of their main things to do is to be the primary interface with the property manager, this on-site person. And when we work with on-site people, it's only people that I've trust and I've worked with for many years, for at least 3 to 4 years, that I've had like an ongoing relationship with. And they have to be someone that's doing flipping or has some sort of construction knowledge, because it's about putting the right person in the right seat. And so if I have the right person in the right seat who is proactive and knows how much things cost and has a great like head on their shoulders to be able to improvise and make decisions based on the whole group, then I don't have to be there to make those urgent decisions right away. So for instance, when that fire happened, right, our boots on the ground in Louisville, Kentucky, she went out there and she took pictures and she posted in our Slack channel, hey, this is what happened, guys. Like we had a fire, the property management team is on it, here's what we're doing. And then we continue the conversation in Slack. And then we have our biweekly meeting where we all get together and talk with the property manager and amongst ourselves what to do with those action item follow-ups. And all of that stuff can get scheduled in advance. So that's one example of one process. Another process that I'm super proud of is I also have a podcast, Jonathan. And so my intake flow, the way it goes is someone will go in and if they want to come onto our show, I have them fill out a form online. That's a Google form. The Google form information that has like your bio, your what you want to talk about, all of your social media, like all the things that are important in a production type asset, they all go into a Google form and then they are entered automatically into a Google spreadsheet. And then inside of the Google sheet, I have a Zapier trigger that's watching the Google Sheet and it's integrated with Chat GPT. So as soon as people enter in their bio and the things that they want asked and their all of their basic information and their website and everything, I have a Chat GPT prompt inside of my spreadsheet that pulls in all of those pieces of information and generates a prompt, sends it to Chat GPT through Zapier, and then spits out a show description right there, right when the person books. So it's things like this that add up over time to where I can use a small amount of virtual assistants to get my work done. And I can streamline the process so that when I'm talking with my virtual assistants, there's the only thing to talk about is creative stuff. It's not the administrative. It's not, hey, did you take care of this? Did you take care of that? I even have it down to a science where as soon as we have a recording completed, I check off something on the checklist and then a calendar invite gets sent to my assistant that says that this is when the show is due based on the date that that's on the spreadsheet that's supposed to be released. That way we can keep on track of our targets. And so we're trying to eliminate all types of manual work and administration, because you'd be surprised what can be automated these days with Zapier and with a bunch of these tools that artificial intelligence is just completely changing the game. And I'm just loving it. I love being able to play with all these things. So yeah.
So we're being able to systematize things like this is clearly a skill. Did you develop that skill somewhere else before you started in your real estate journey, or is this something that you learned how to do once you got into real estate?
I think I have been cultivating the skill for quite some time. When I was growing up, I taught myself C++ and BASIC, right? Because my dad was a computer programmer and I just loved the ability to be able to create stuff from nothing, it seems like, right? And I was really good at math and everything. So I ended up becoming an engineer and graduating as a chemical engineer. And then I got my MBA. And then I started learning a little bit about business. And then I got into project management for my full-time career. And then I started wanting to invest in real estate on the side because I wanted some passive income and I didn't want to depend on one career, all that stuff, right? And so I feel like it's kind of this culmination of me wanting to play, right? Wanting to be more efficient, build businesses and have stuff run without me being there, right? So I'm all about these using AI and tech tools and, leveraging assistance as much as you can, and just being in general as streamlined as possible to never ever be the bottleneck. That's in my project management career. That was my main goal, is to never be the bottleneck and to be able to communicate efficiently and help provide clear guidance to everyone on the team to accomplish the goal and get it done on time, under budget and on schedule.
I mean, it's interesting how life has little synchronicities. I just finished recording a podcast earlier today where we actually were talking about some of this as well. Not so much from the automation perspective, but in terms of developing workflows, developing systems, systematizing everything, not being the bottleneck yourself, and making sure that you have enough help so that you can actually get your business moving. Because lots of people, myself included, have made the mistake of trying to do everything myself, right? And trying to, because you start out in business and you're like, I can do it all, right? There's a combination of I can do it all. All this stuff seems really simple, and I don't want to pay anybody to do it, right? And then if I try to pay somebody to do it, they don't get it anyway, and I wind up having to do it myself. So it's just too much of a pain in the neck, right? So we all go through this process until either we drive ourselves out of business or we realize that we're the bottleneck and we have to start getting some help, especially with the things that we really don't enjoy. Now, it seems to me like you enjoy the process of ideation, the process of being creative. You don't want to do a lot of these admin tasks, and you figured out how to automate them. You can either automate them through technology the way you've done, or you can automate them through people, which is sort of my approach to things. But either way, you have to get out of your own way and start handing things off so that you can actually focus on, what have been referred to as like, the $1,000 an hour tasks, not the $10 an hour tasks, right? So
100%.
it's
Yeah.
very timely that you're talking about this.
1,000%. Yeah, no, and that's really that's timely because I would say also for your specific situation, I think there is a perfect opportunity for adding people to the equation. But if you augment them with AI and processes and technologies, it's really, really crazy how efficient you can get a team to run, right? Especially if they have standard operating procedures. Now, I'm running into a situation right now where, we may have to either replace or add VAs in our system, in our whole, ecosystem. But it's very easy to do that because we have an SOP library that we've been building up over time. So when people think, oh, it's like, I'll just do it myself. It's easier for me just to do it myself. I'll save time and energy and whatever. Well, that may be true for this specific task right now. But what happens in the future when this becomes something that you can't afford to do? You don't have the time to do any of this. It is well worth it to invest the time to create. And nowadays it's as easy as flipping on the recording of your screen, right? While you're doing the task. And that can be your SOP. You just go to Loom, you turn on the screen recording, and you just talk while you're completing the task that you want automated. And the next time you give that Loom video to someone to do it on your behalf, right? Now, it has to be stored in the right place. And that's why we like to use Asana or some sort of project management tool to keep everything aligned. So we've got tasks and the SOP library in a single place. It's easy to refer to. But there's little tips and tricks like that you'll end up learning. You could have a Google Sheet that's got all of the SOPs in one place. All types of things that you can do. But it's up to you how to set it up. And I just highly recommend that people go down that path because, man, it is so worth it. Because if something doesn't work out and you need to replace someone or make a staff change, having those SOPs is a lifesaver because you can say, look, I want you to do this. Take a look at the SOP. give it a shot, right? And it will save you and your assistant so much time, right? To get something done.
I just recently went through this where I had a really great assistant who left to take she got a really great new job and she left to take that. And all on her own, this is the kind of assistant she was, all on her own. She went and she made a whole library of SOPs for her replacement.
Amazing.
So now we have this SOP library and it's all there and it's really made the transition to my new assistant very, very smooth. But so not only do we have it there for my new assistant to get trained up, but as my new assistant shows a lot of promise in being really competent and is going to start to want to have more demanding work. Well, now that stuff is all there. So when we promote her to something else, it's very easy to find somebody to do the things that she was doing because we have the SOP library already there. So I'm totally with you on this. I think it's just an essential resource and thing to do, not just for you, but when you have people working for you who have things that they're doing
Yes.
all the time, they should be recording them as well and adding them to the
Yes.
library.
I love that you said that because there's a subtle shift of people. If they have a great SOP library to work from, they will have the tendency or the pressure to want to add to it. Or you will be able to say, hey, can you throw that in the SOP? And the more SOPs that they use as like a standard practice, the more they get comfortable with it and the more willing they are to just document what they do in general, right? And they can see what success looks like in the form of an SOP because they followed one and they've gotten a successful result. And then it empowers them to be able to have you be able to just say, hey, can you create an SOP on what you've just done? And I've done that already with my assistants and it's worked out wonderfully, right? I have them find a problem, take a problem, take it down, and then we talk about the solution and be like, yeah, I would have done this differently or that differently, or, help troubleshoot during our, 3x per week meetings where I'm sitting with the virtual assistants. But once we get the process nailed down, it's like, okay, let's document it. Let's make an SOP for it. And then it's up to them to record the video and then put the bullet points together and get all that stuff round out. So couldn't agree more with you there.
Are you running any system in your business like EOS, entrepreneurial operating systems, or traction, or there are a lot of different kinds of methodologies out there, but do you have one of those things a process that you run in your business for keeping track of KPIs and things like that?
Yes. So, well, I mean, I think we may be doing our own take on it, but basically we have a KPI scorecard that gets filled out every pay period with my virtual assistants. This is for me going down, me up, and me like to, with my peers and my partners on my individual properties and syndications and stuff is a little bit different. But for me going down, right, looking downwards, we have these level 10 meetings, I guess, or just basically meetings that every other week where we say, okay, what worked, what didn't work. Here's the scorecard. How did you do? And then basically I tabulate out all the KPIs that they hit. And then that has a direct correlation with how much they get paid. So I have it set up so that a certain amount of their salary or their income is made. A large portion of it, I'd say 75% of what they make is fixed, right? And then another 25% of what they earn is based on KPIs, on the number of hours they work. So if they don't hit their KPIs, then they don't max out their salary. So we're always looking at the KPIs and we're making sure that there's two-way communication going back and forth between our partners to understand where they are as individuals, as human beings, and treating them like valuable members of the team, because that's really what they are. Because they're intelligent, smart, thoughtful people that have their own ideas because they're doing all the work. And I empower them to explore other tools. Like we got beautiful.ai, for instance, because it'll help make presentations really easily, right? And give great ideas for that. We bought that as a suggestion from one of our assistants, just because it was going to make them more efficient in creating presentations. And so doing the math on it, it would only take us about 10 hours of an assistant's time to have it pay for itself, right, in savings. And so it's it's thinking like that, that really makes a big difference. But yes, that's kind of what we do. And I'd be curious to hear if you do the same, if you have level 10 meetings or if you use Traction or EOS or.
No, I don't, but I mean, it's always been something that I've been intending to implement. And now that I'm becoming much more serious about implementing systems and about, making sure that KPIs get hit and that functions are being delegated appropriately, it's definitely something that I'm interested in starting to implement? Because I mean, I love asking people about these kinds of questions. Part of the great thing about having a podcast is like you get to educate yourself. You get to sort of pick other people's brains about what they're doing and find best practices and stuff, right? So lots of times I'm asking questions about
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
that I'm not doing, but I'm like, I really want to hear from you, like what is it you're doing? Because maybe this is something that I can implement myself.
Of course. Very cool. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Um, but so let's sort of backtrack a little bit now and talk about how you first got into this business. So you mentioned that you had a W-2 job, and you wanted to start investing in real estate to generate alternative sources of income. So tell me how you got into that and whether you expected that to become its own thing, or whether this initially it was just something to do for investment, and then it wound up taking on a life of its own.
Oh, like all good businesses, Jonathan, this started completely on accident. It was completely on accident. And it's a very long story for how we got there, but basically, long story short, my wife had purchased her condo in Washington State for grad school, in I think it was May of 2008. And so the condo was like, she paid 250 grand or something for this condo on the east side of the Seattle area, basically. And by the time she had graduated, because there was the 2008 mortgage meltdown and real estate just took a huge nosedive, her condo was only worth like $90,000, and it stayed underwater for several years. So when she graduated and had her residency in Northern California in the Bay Area, we were kind of stuck. Like we couldn't sell it because it was still underwater. And so the only thing that we could do to potentially like keep this from, basically wrecking our already strained finances, because we both had student loans and we were early out in our career, right, in 2008, was we decided to rent out the property, right, to rent it out. And so we were trying to figure it out as like do it yourself landlords, and trying to download those realtor forms for leases, and just trying to get like a feel for how it all worked. And at the same time, I was trying to pay off my student loans, and I was heavy into Dave Ramsey, right, into paying down your debt and then just put your money into stocks, right? But I got disenchanted when I found out that it was going to take me 25 years to be able to retire. And that was if I was maxing out my savings, right? Like with my current salary and the way it was anticipated to grow over the next, decade or two, right? And so when we were driving down from Washington to California, we got our first, rent check that came in, you know, from my wife's property in Washington. And yet the property was underwater, but it was cash flowing because it made more than enough to cover the mortgage and all the other expenses that went with it. And it got my gears turning, right? I was kind of like, man, if we did this on accident, what would happen if we leaned into it on purpose? Like, what would happen? So then, I basically, once that happened and I started asking that question, my engineering nature came out and I wanted to learn everything about the subject, and started going on, listening to all the podcasts on Bigger Pockets and getting as many books as I could, and didn't do anything for like 2 years because I was like in this perfectionist mode, right? Um, and then finally, when I did, we got a great start by buying some property in the California Bay Area as rental property, pure rental property, and then ended up 1031ing that into like 12 units in Indiana. And then I was kind of hooked in buying in the Midwest from the West Coast. And that's kind of how I got my start.
And so how did you manage that stuff from the West Coast when you're buying in Indiana and the
Yeah, it
Midwest?
was really hard because, even back in 2018, like all the tools that we've just been talking about haven't existed yet. Like they weren't commonplace, right? And they weren't being used in the ways that we're using them right now. So really what it took for me was learning as much as I could about the market, and then flying out there and getting a great property manager that could be my boots on the ground and could be someone that I could answer questions to. And what I did, Jonathan, was I told my property manager that I intend to build a portfolio. Here's the cash that I have available, and here's my income coming in each month. And I plan to buy a property like once every quarter, at least. I ended up buying a property once every month because, back in Indianapolis in 2017, 2018, you could buy houses for like 40, 50,000, right? And that was like a down payment was the size of one of my paychecks in California. And so what I did was I incentivized the property manager, and then I got a second property manager so that in case something happened with the first one, they still had a sizable portfolio, like 3 or 4 units, right? 3 or 4 houses for each. because if you only do one house and then you just sit there for a year and don't do anything, they're not going to want to give you priority, right? They're not going to pay attention to you. Property managers like repeat units with one owner because it's easier to communicate with just one owner for multiple units, right? So that's what ended up happening was I got property managers on my side by making trips out to the state. I physically went there before I invested and spent 3 days just interviewing people, not driving around the city looking for properties. I was interviewing people, contractors, lenders, property managers, agents, everyone, right? Everyone that I could know, other investors, right? So that I could build my network out there so that in case things fell through, I had some outs, right? I had some people that would be able to know me and would offer me help in case, something went wrong.
It's funny. I do want to ask you the question. We'll bookmark this about how do you find a good property manager, because this is always a problem for people. But I just wanted to say that people ask me all the time, how do I get, and usually they're talking about brokers, but it could really be anything. How do I get these people to pay attention to me when I'm new? And I always say, fly out to see them, right? It is the fastest way to get somebody to pay attention to. If you tell them, I am flying halfway across the country to meet you, they will make time for you. It's unbelievable, but people will, there's some magic about saying to somebody, I'm going to make a special trip to come see you, or I'm going to be in town where you are for one day. Can I see you while I'm there? Suddenly you're a scarce if you call them from wherever you are, they don't answer the phone. But if you're like in town for a day, suddenly you're scarce and they need to see you, right? Because you're going to disappear. And it's a weird psychological thing, but always, like, the power of going to meet somebody in person can't overstate how important this is.
Can't beat it. I would also say bring a little bit of cash with you and buy them lunch. Like that's how we were able to break into some of our most lucrative connections. And by lucrative, I mean most fruitful connections, right? Like a property manager. We sat down and treated them to breakfast and lunch and dinner, right? And so we were eating a lot. And so I think I gained a couple of pounds on some of those trips. But the point is that everyone needs to eat, right? And so no one, regardless of what their status is, or depending on like how high, like you're obviously not going to talk with the most successful broker in the entire state, like sitting down. I mean, you might be able to, but you'll be able to get a lot more high-powered people to take you seriously if you fly in from out of state and you treat them to lunch or dinner or breakfast in their own town. That is something that cannot be understated because it's leading with value first. It's like, why do people want to help you? Like, why would they invest the time and energy to try to work with someone or have the possibility of working with someone that may not even work out? They don't know you, right? They don't know how serious you are. And sometimes you don't even know how serious you are either, because when it comes to signing those documents, if you're not going to ink your signature and you're going to back out, you've ruined a lot of your relationships out there. So the first thing to do is to get to know some of the people out there, see them on a face-to-face basis, and also find out whether you jive with them personality-wise, right? Like if your values clearly don't line up as an individual and someone is like a profit first individual that doesn't align with your values of like being more heart-centered, then that's not someone to work with, right? Because that's going to clash instantly. And you'll find that out in a matter of minutes when you sit down and talk with them in person.
So before people start reaching out to me with offers of lunch and flying into New York City, I just want to let you know, I bring my lunch every day because I don't like to eat out because I gain weight if I eat out, but my love language is beer. So
Go.
I'm usually I'm like incredibly caffeinated by 10 a.m. So I can't drink any more coffee either. But
There you
you
go.
might tempt me with a beer. Okay. So anyway, so I wanted to ask you, but seriously, I mean, aside from, so flying out is how you get people to pay attention to you, but in terms of finding a good property manager, it's always a problem. Property managers, like everybody else, present themselves very well. Everybody sounds good when you meet them. So how is it that you identify people who really are good?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I used when I was looking for my search back then. And nowadays I do it a little bit differently. But back then, the Bigger Pockets forums was great because you got to see the property managers that were active and hungry. And so you just follow, for your local market, you just go in there and you see what property manager is actively answering questions, and they're answering questions in a helpful, positive, and correct way, right? Like thoughtful, or maybe they're taking a less risky approach, or maybe they're bringing up good points that people don't think of. Those are people who you want on your team. So that gives you a short list of people that you should at least go out to try to make a point to go visit with, right? So that's one way to get them. The most important thing, and this is the way that we get good property managers these days, is probably not going to be a surprise to you, Jonathan, but it's talking with other investors. It's basically referrals. If you can find other investors who have great experiences with the property manager, then this is where the trust comes in with the individual investor, because property managers are just like contractors, where some investors want to keep it close to the chest, because if they share it, then they're afraid that their portfolio will grow to a point where they can't get the attention on their units that you're getting, right? Because the attention's getting spread out. But if there's that trust factor there with the other investor, where they want you to be in the market, and maybe there's like a future where you two could partner together and do some deals, right? Or you have like some sort of like shared interest, then all it takes is one referral to get a really great inroad with a good property manager. And then the last one is, if you find a rock star insurance broker, or a rock star agent, or a rock star contractor, right? Someone who is like really impresses you, ask them who they like to work with on property management. Ask them, because rock stars tend to hang out with rock stars. You don't see bad contractors hanging out with really good property managers. That doesn't work. That energy doesn't vibrate. Like, you wouldn't have a good property manager referring out work to a bad contractor. That doesn't make any sense, So think about it two ways, and always triangulate, right? Like, always try, like, once you get a few names, either from doing your own search, or from referrals from investors, or from referrals from like vendors that precede or that are after a property manager, right? Always triangulate. Ask them what they think of this person, if they've heard of this property manager, if they've heard of this particular person, and what they think of how well they run, and that'll give you some more information. If you get 2 to 3 different like hell yeses, then most likely they're a really good person. If you get a few wishy-washy answers, then it might be worth it to talk to them to see like what the issue is, like maybe sit down and talk with them. But just be on your guard and look for some red flags. But yeah, I think that's my advice. I'm curious, would you agree with all of that?
Yeah, I was actually, it's funny because I was going to say that, the best brokers always know who the best property managers are, because they often work together, and vice versa. And the good property managers know who the good brokers are, because they constantly see each other all the time, right? And the brokers are like, they know, because they know the market, right? So they know which properties are managed well and which properties are crap, right?
Yep.
And so they have a really good handle on that, right? So and vice versa. I've always found that, like, the property managers, oftentimes it's easier to get to the property manager, because a lot of property managers, they're always on the lookout for new business, right? And so you can easily get a meeting with the property manager, but maybe the broker's harder. But if you go to the property manager first and you say, hey, who are the best brokers in town? They'll give you a list of names, say, hey, can you introduce me to one of them? Now, suddenly now the broker's going to talk to you, because you have this warm introduction from somebody that they know. And because it's come through a property manager, they just ascribe seriousness to you that they wouldn't if you were just coming in cold.
Trust is everything in this game. And if you can use leverage an existing relationship, or even an acquaintance from someone, right? Then you can't help it, even from a subconscious point of view, right? Even if you just met a property manager, like, hey, can you refer me some great brokers? They'll be like, sure. And if they really liked you on the call, they'll make an intro. The broker is not going to call the property manager unless they're very sharp, right? Or it's a high stakes deal that they have on the plate that they're looking for someone for. They're not going to ask the property manager, where'd you get this person from? They just trust the property manager is willing to,
Yeah,
is
put their
for.
reputation on the line, right, for you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Here's my other favorite one, and I've never heard anybody talk about this before. I love getting introductions to real estate people from non-real estate people.
Hmm.
Like, if you are able, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it happens, and when it does, it's great, where you can do something like get on LinkedIn. Once you identify who the players are that you want to meet, get on LinkedIn, and every once in a while it's going to happen that you'll actually have a common friend or a common acquaintance who has nothing to do with real estate at all. And when you can go through that person, it's often even more like of a surefire, like successful intro, because that person's thinking, oh, you're a friend, like you're a friend of this person. It's not, you know, it's not just like a business thing where you're just trying to make money or whatever. So
Yeah.
I love using LinkedIn to try to figure out how I might know somebody and who can introduce me.
100%. I think one caveat that I would mention too to people is the power of in person is very real. And even if you are living on, like for instance, you're on the East Coast, right? And if you're going to invest in the Midwest, I can almost guarantee you that somewhere in within a 50-mile radius, there are out of state investor meetups in person somewhere, right? Maybe it's paid, maybe it's free, but you'd be surprised if you go there for 3 or 4 times in a row and you see some familiar faces. If you build that up, their network becomes yours also. If they get to know you and you're telling them, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, most people want to help, especially if they can sense that you're genuine about what you're trying to do. Then they'd be happy to connect you with people that will give you a head start above and beyond what we've been talking about here today, right? For you, trying to like research your own and everything, you may jumpstart all of that, right? And learn a whole bunch of stuff and have some fun and get to know some other people who may end up becoming your partners by going to meet other investors in person. So if I was to advise people who are starting out on the active side on their own, the first thing is get the vocabulary, understand the vocabulary so that when you talk with people, you don't sound like you don't know what you're saying, and you're making you're not starting off on the right foot, and you only have one chance to make a good first impression. So go in to those real estate meetups with some background knowledge of the vocabulary, so you at least know what they're saying, right? And be authentic, right? And be just want to learn and just ask questions and be engaged and helpful. And if you do that, I think that that's really all you need, because that's where trust starts, and this is a trust-based business.
Absolutely. So we we're getting kind of close to the end of our time, but before we get there, I do want to ask you sort of what was that next step in your journey where, so you had this 11 unit in Indiana that you bought, and now you're doing syndications with investor money. What happened in between those two points in time?
Yeah. So we started off doing, you know, local, like we bought one property locally in California where we lived. And then we 1031 that into Indiana properties, like where we were buying stuff in the Midwest. And we kept buying like houses and everything. And then we went to small multifamily. And then after that, we went to commercial as a joint venture. So me and like 3 or 4 other buddies, like we put all of our money in and we split up the tasks and we just bought a multifamily property together. And I did that a few times until I ran out of money, both me, myself, and also with my friends. And then I got a mentor, and then the mentor helped me go through some uh, self-limiting beliefs and some of the things that you go through when you start raising capital and trying to find property with other people's money. And once we got through that, started, investing with coworkers, and bring in money. And then it's amazing how quickly the machine starts like turning. I'm sure that you found that too, is that once you do one deal, it's like the law of the first deal that Michael Blanc always talks about.
Yeah.
Once you get that first deal done, you have a proof of concept down, and you also have like a bunch of investors who have been like watching you. And when you close the first one, you're like, hey, we got this next one available. And then it becomes easier to meet more people and so on and so forth. And so we just kind of took off from there, to the point where we're at over 400 units now today.
The first one is always hard because nobody wants to be in your first deal.
Yes.
Brokers don't want to be in your first deal. The lenders don't want to be in your first deal.
Mhm.
Maybe the managers do. The investors, most of them won't,
Yeah.
except for possibly some friends and family. And but once you get that first one, everyone else is sort of watching to see, is this going to work or not? And once you get one done, then suddenly, I would say the floodgates open, but it
Yep.
becomes a whole lot easier the next time around. And if you're kind of doing all these things that you talked about, while we're sort of building your network, right? If you're continuing to engage in all those activities as you should be, you have a bigger audience watching you than you realize.
Yeah.
And when you go out to ask for money on the next deal, you'll be surprised by the results you can get.
100%. I would also say that if you can, you will make it so much easier on yourself if you partner with someone else who has done a deal before on the
Yes,
first one,
absolutely.
because the lenders will trust you more. And even if you're like a 30% owner, right, or a 20% or a 10% owner, but a general partner on the overall property, you have some controlling interest, people will take you seriously, a lot more seriously, including the brokers, because they know that you can get a deal done. And the worst thing that you can do to a broker is not get a deal done when you say you can, right? That is terrible, especially if it's your first one. You're, I don't know. I don't know about you, Jonathan, but to me, if I was a broker, I would be very quick to put you on a blacklist and just not want to work with you again until you can prove that you've done work with other brokers, right?
Yeah, yeah. If you've closed a bunch of deals, then you get a couple for free, maybe that you can't close, but the other way around doesn't work. I mean, once if you flub the first one, it's going to be harder to dig yourself out of that hole for sure.
100%. And brokers talk with each other, even though they're in different brokerages. There's a line of communication somewhere, right? I don't know where they're getting together and talking about deals and stuff, but names go around, right? Like, it may not be at the individual brokers, but people in the high level, like the owners of the brokerage, they have like a list of investors that are investing in markets, and they all exchange notes, right? Was this person hard to work with? And there's referrals too. Like, if you buy from CBRE and then you get a referral from Marcus and Millichap, hopefully you did well by Marcus and Millichap and you did everything you said you're going to do, because they'll give you a great referral to the CBRE folks, right? It's just weird how that industry works, that they're competing against each other, but then they also understand that they have to help each other in getting the right investors to, get in the deals. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, this is a business in which people like to network and they like to talk to each other.
yeah,
And the brokers are always moving back and forth between shops anyway, so they maintain their relationships with other brokers. So yeah, but people talk. I mean, you want to leave a good reputation and a good impression wherever you go. I mean, that should be a
100%.
really high priority for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, listen, we're kind of out of time, and it sounds like we could talk about this stuff for quite a bit, but we do have a deadline. So, listen, Derek, this has been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed speaking with you. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing, learn about how to automate their lives, or maybe invest with you as a sponsor, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is go to our free ebook, which is elevateequity.org/podcast gift, all one word. And there you'll get a PDF that basically explains to people how ready they are based on a whole bunch of equities. If you're, relationship equity, financial equity, knowledge equity, all that type of stuff. And it's a self-assessing quiz that you can figure out like how far along you are to be able to pull the trigger on either an active property and or be a passive property. And we'd like to help you with both of those. So our contact information is inside that. And we're on all the socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We're there. We're everywhere. So just look us up. Handle is Derek Loves Equity for Instagram, or just look me up on my name, Derek Clifford, on LinkedIn or Facebook. I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, definitely go and grab that ebook and that quiz at elevateequity.org and follow up with Derek by all means. So Derek, once again, we thank you for being on the show today. Thank you again for your flexibility with the schedule, and
Yeah.
it was great meeting you.
Yeah. Great meeting you too. I'm glad we got a chance to talk. Hopefully we can do it again.
Awesome. Thank you very much.